Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's NEASC Forum, Teaching the Election. With just under 50 days to go to the US election, it's a very timely topic and on the top of many of our minds as educators and citizens. But what you might not know is that nearly 50% of the world's nations are holding national elections this year. Some significant ones have already happened and some are coming up still. So we're excited to delve into this topic, both from a US and from an international perspective. We have a wonderful panel of educators and leaders joining us from across New England and around the world today.
Welcome, educators from around the globe. As Kelly said, I'm Carl Johnson, one of the Associate Directors for Accreditation and School Improvement within the Commission on Public Schools for the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. I'll be your moderator for today's crucial discussion on civics education. Prior to joining NEASC, I was a high school principal, assistant principal, and most importantly for this conversation, a social studies teacher in Connecticut. One part of that role I found to be the most exciting and challenging was helping students build their understanding of a complex world, especially the day after a historical moment in our state, country, or world. As you know, during any national election cycle, students' questions, curiosities, and interests are awakened regarding their understanding of the political world. As we gather virtually, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment in history. The landscape of civic engagement is rapidly evolving, shaped by technological advancements, global interconnectedness, and unprecedented access to information. Yet these changes come with new challenges in educating the next generation of citizens and leaders. Today, we have assembled a distinguished panel of educators who are leading the charge in addressing these challenges. They will share their experiences, strategies, and insights on a range of pressing topics related to civics education. We will discuss topics including empowering students to recognize and combat misinformation, especially in the realm of social media, modeling and fostering respectful political dialogue and an understanding of differing viewpoints, preparing students to be agents of change and fostering civic engagement, cultivating a generation that is both politically engaged and consensus-oriented. As you can well imagine, this topic could be discussed for hours. While we will try to hit some major points, our goal today is not to solve every problem related to this issue. We will share practices that have helped our panelists, and we hope to generate ideas for your future work with your students. Our panelists bring diverse perspectives from various educational contexts, and their collective wisdom will undoubtedly provide valuable insights for all of us. That being said, I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves and share a little bit about their current context working with students in regards to civics education.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jed Lippard, and I am the Chief Learning Officer at Buckingham Brown and Nichols School, which is a pre-K through 12th grade independent school serving just over 1,000 students in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In my role, I support teaching and learning, curriculum and instruction, professional growth and development, and a whole range of things related to sort of innovative practice. My personal interest and I would say professional crusade with regards to civics education stemmed from my own participation in an organization, an international organization called Braver Angels that was formed out of the 2016 presidential election in the United States, where a group of people who identify as Reds or conservative-leaning, typically Republican, came together to engage in a weekend set of dialogues with people who identify as Blues, liberal-leaning, typically Democrat. They've since developed a whole series of exercises to get Reds and Blues to talk to each other respectfully across difference. I had the good fortune of participating in a weekend session along those lines. And what I realized at the time was that it's kind of too late for old people like me to be having these conversations. And the real work is to bring that kind of dialogue to young people. So happy to share some thoughts about how we've been doing that, and welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bree Foley. I am the history department chair at the Taft School in Watertown, Connecticut. The Taft School is a secondary independent boarding school, and we serve around 600 students. I teach U.S. history, I teach world history, I also teach econ at the Taft School. And I'm also the director of a program called the Global Leadership Institute, which is a public-private partnership that's aimed at creating global leaders through service in their community. And additionally, I work as the faculty advisor to our school newspaper. So in that context, we deal with a lot of student opinions and politics and learning how to navigate all of that without censorship. Nice to meet you all.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brianna Bobo. I do prefer to go by Bobo. I am a 8th grade U.S. social studies teacher working here in West Hartford at Sedgwick Middle School. And so how I engage with civics is in our curriculum, we do have to teach government in the early stages and how it evolved over time. And so that is an awesome opportunity to engage our young people in an interest at a young age to get involved within their own government, whether it's locally or nationally. I also do a mentor group at Connor High School, which is a high school within our town. And so in that, we're preparing our young women to prepare themselves for life after high school. And so that does involve becoming an active citizen. So those are the different ways I engage. I'm looking forward to talking with you guys.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Tamburello-Noble. I'm a principal at Conard High School. Our student population serves around 1,500 students, and we have 64 different languages, and we have about 49% students of color. So I give that context because the population of Conard very much mirrors the population of the US. We work a lot at Conard with student advocacy agency and students to understand the democratic process in order to understand their rights and responsibilities and what citizenship looks like. We have many multilingual and international students, and we have just 25 new students we received in the last 2 weeks here at Conard. So we're very proud of our very diverse population, but we want to ensure that all of our students understand their rights in the democratic process and being able to provide meaningful information for them.
Hi, I'm Donna Morin from I teach in Hudson, New Hampshire at a smallish school. It's a kind of a rural school. And I engage in civics by doing this. Today is Constitution Day. If you live in America, that's the day, it's just the day we celebrate the Constitution. And I usually dress up as the Statue of Liberty, and our department gives us candy, and we ask them questions from our citizenship test, and I just throw them candy. So I just was doing it today, so I thought I'd continue wearing this, you know, during our Zoom, and that's why I'm looking this way. But I also engage, I teach, I'm just basically a teacher. I teach on grade, our college prep, American government students, and AP advanced placement students, American government. And these are all primarily seniors. So they're either 18 or they're 17. They're going to be voting soon. So this is they're a little bit more excited about the process and becoming a citizen and what they need to do. I also coach a mock trial team, so that also helps students engaged in the process. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alejandro Castillo. I am a IB history teacher at the International School Nido de Águilas in Santiago de Chile. This school is a pre-K to 12th through 12th grade school. We have about 1,500 students from all around the globe, but mostly Chile, of course. I've been teaching history for quite a while. And my connection to civics and citizenship education is mostly curricular based because it is part of the topics that we address in class, especially taking into account the history of Chile that had to go through 17 years of dictatorship. The breakdown of democracy, it's an integral part of the curriculum here. So that's how I'm connected to civics. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thanks Kelly and Carl for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for taking a moment to introduce yourselves. I think, as you can see, we have an incredible group of panelists that are going to be able to share their insights today. So as we embark on this critical dialogue, let's embark with open minds and a shared commitment to nurturing informed, engaged, and responsible citizens for our global future. Without further ado, let's begin our discussion about teaching the election. So our first question that I wanted to raise to the panel, many of our students are not yet of voting age, but their engagement in civic life is crucial for the future of our democracy. How do you foster political awareness and civic engagement among your students, even if they can't vote?
As a principal, one of the biggest pieces that we really include is student voice and choice in terms of decisions that we make about the school community as a whole. So we have a student council, we have different leadership programs where they give advice and feedback, everything from curriculum to the way that we assess to the way we run our school. There's a possible schedule change next year and our students are providing feedback on that. And really the fact that we want to make sure that we continue to stimulate voice and choice and understanding that students have a voice in the process and using their sphere of influence to make and create change. Even though students are not at voting age, they have to understand that at any age they can start providing feedback in order to create change and in order to call out systems that are sometimes not always meaningful and intended for them. So really being meaningful about how we help them advocate and support and being able to have them be part of the democratic process. We encourage them to connect with local and town officials when there are things that are on the pipeline for any kind of voting or laws or things that may impact them. We communicate with them as well so they understand what is coming down the pipeline that's going to impact them.
Awesome. Thank you, Jocelyn. Yeah, Donna.
As a teacher, I do a lot of role modeling, meeting as many presidential candidates. I live in New Hampshire, so we get many presidential candidates coming through our state. So I meet them and then share pictures and get the students' excitement that way. So the students are always asking if they can meet people. So I bring in as many speakers as possible, and that really seems to generate excitement. They're able to look at what issues are important to them and then address their own local leaders about it. And that's a very exciting thing for them. And the other just really practical way that I help students engage in civics on their own is through just a simple extra credit assignment. They share with me any way that they're involved in government, politics, or whatever, just anything they do in their day-to-day life. And then they just send me a quick email connecting what they did to the class. And then they get a few extra points, and sometimes we share it in class. But that keeps them a lot of times just always on the lookout, like, where do I see civics in the world?
Thank you, Donna. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Bobo?
Just to piggyback off what everyone was just saying, how I see it is that being able to vote is really learning how to use your voice to make positive change. And so what I like to do with any of the students that I work with is giving them opportunity and space to develop their voice and figure out where are the areas of change or places that they see issues that they can push in to create positive change. And so I think as much as opportunities and spaces we can create for our students, as Ms. Jocelyn just shared, within government, or allowing students to run programs or being on advisory boards, or just even having the opportunity just to share how they feel about how school is going or their class. This is a safe place to equip our students to strengthen their voice, so that way they know that their voice matters and that they can use their voice to create change.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, Jed?
Sure. So prior to my current role, I was the head of the Bank Street School for Children in New York City. And Bank Street has a decades-long tradition every 4 years during the US presidential election of basically transforming the upper school, which at that school, which is a pre-K through 8th grade, upper school being 5 through 8, each of the grade levels would serve as a particular function of the election. So one grade was the pollsters, one grade was the pundits, one grade actually ran the candidates, and one grade was the media. And so instead of actually trying to do a mock election based on the actual candidates running in the presidential election, the focus was really on the issues and understanding what are the different points of view on controversial issues that seem to be polarizing our nation and actually our world. So everything from guns to immigration to abortion rights, et cetera. And then each student who wanted to in the 7th grade would be able to run for office. And then there was a primary and then a general election. And the whole upper school, 5th through 8th grade, was able to run. Again, taking the emphasis away from specific candidates in the US presidential election and really trying to focus on the issues. At the current school where I work at BBNN, similarly in the middle school, it's looking at the ballot initiatives that are on the Massachusetts state ballot this year and really trying to dig into the underlying differences of opinion to try to understand why people hold different perspectives and why people have different ideas, reasonable people on all sides of an issue. And just, I would say that it's really important. It's interesting that the topic of this webinar is teaching the election. I think the key to that is actually not what happens every 4 years, but what happens in the 4 years in between, which is helping students to develop the critical capacity to hold multiple perspectives at the same time.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chet. I want to ask a follow-up to that because it's something that I struggle with from my teaching days. So, how do you instill in students a sense of responsibility for addressing global challenges without overwhelming them? I think one of the mistakes I feel like I made in my teaching career was, telling students they would be the ones that would save us, that, like our generations, hadn't accomplished what we needed to, and they would be the ones to fix it, which now looking back, that's putting an awful lot of weight on a group of 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds. But I'm wondering how you try to build that in your students, the idea that they're going to be taking on some major challenges in the future, but not overwhelming them at the same time.
I can jump into that. So I think for a lot of our students, helping to support them and connect them to a cause that's meaningful for them, and kind of taking one cause at a time, as opposed to, when I was in high school, it was a slew of here's all the things that we need to do and fix in this pieces. I think having a connection to students, we ask students what they're passionate about, what they want to change. And we start first locally, like what are the things that we see, one, in our school that we want to help students create agency around and voice. And we talk about voice and choice all the time. So at our schools and local, in our town, in our state, and then we kind of go through different pieces. But first, students need to feel like a cause is meaningful and contextualized to them in order for them to feel connected, like they empowered, in order for them to feel connected and empowered to create change. So we start with something smaller. We really do look at causes that they can connect to. They can't fix everything, but they can certainly start and create small changes within their community.
Does anyone else have any examples of starting locally at their schools or in their communities with students trying to build that sense of change or sense of work to make things better? Yeah, Donna.
We had used a program. The kids can choose to take an honors program if they'd like to earn more points towards their GPA. And those students last year, they found, it was a similar kind of thing. They found a situation that they weren't happy with, which happened to be one of our classes. Students are now forced to take a humanities class, which is a US history and an English class combined. And a lot of students want to separate it and take those two classes separately. So they didn't like that. So they did quite a bit of research. They did polling. They went to town. They went to the school board, and then they did a presentation to the principal, and they became their own advocates for change. So just having them look at something and then really make the change, or try to make the change by doing a presentation in front of the school board or the principal or whatever it is, was an interesting experience for them.
Thank you, Donna. Bree, I think you.
Yeah, we do something very similar here at Taft. It's called the Global Leadership Institute, but we actually partner up students from our school with students from a neighboring city. And there's 6 schools involved. And we intentionally partner them up with a student that's not from the school that they're in. And they have a 2-year program to just find some way they can like push boundaries in their own community, to serve and to make a change, and even a really small way, whether it's in their own school, whether it's in their town. And some students latch on to like global organizations as well. Whatever their passion is, to show them that they can be empowered, and empowerment can come from serving others, and like learning how to be a leader can come from serving others. And they actually go through this entire 2-year program where they research a project. It has to be evidence-based, academic, and scholarly, and then they have to carry it out, and then they reflect on this great presentation. Like the mayor comes, like the superintendent comes, school principals come, school leaders from our school come, and we have like a nice dinner, and most people are leaving that night after those 2 years without a dry eye. Like, it's so empowering and it's so impactful, and having them work with somebody who they didn't know at all and is potentially from somewhere very different from them, has been incredibly eye-opening as well.
Awesome. Yeah, Bobo.
So mentoring with young women, I'm always looking at programs to introduce them to. So 2 things that I thought about when we were talking about this is Girl State, which is ran through the American Legion Auxiliary, as well as UConn Human Rights Close to Home. So I'll talk a little bit about Girl States. Girl State is an opportunity where they have girls come over the summer. They stay at these colleges. It's girls from all over Connecticut, and they talk about civic issues, and they actually model it out. So you have town elections, and then from town election, it builds up to voting for the governor, and students have to actually engage in like a mock trial of how government works for us in our everyday life. And it's a great opportunity for young women, one, to see how it actually works, but also to apply the skill sets that they learn in school. And then you also have Human Rights Close to Home project, where you have students who spend a summer with not only their peers, but also faculty from across Connecticut who comes in and they talk about different issues that relate not only the United States, but globally, global issues, and they figure out solutions. And students have an entire year to come up with a way that they can try to solve that problem within their own town context. And so these are programs that you can introduce your kids to, but you can also modify it for within your classroom to engage with them when it comes to these type of topics.
Yeah, those are, just listening, those are all incredible ideas. And one of the things that it strikes me is just the idea of authentic audiences with students, and, getting them in front of community members and real people. And it just makes it so much more authentic for the kids. So I want to shift gears a little bit. And I think from either a teaching perspective in the classroom or a leadership perspective, can you talk about communicating the importance of political neutrality for teachers and how they can do this? Bree?
So we actually have been having a lot of conversations about this amongst the faculty here at Taft, and I have a great resource that I can share. We've decided to adopt, it's called a framework for schools thriving in a world of pluralistic contention. It's been incredibly useful to have like the entire school going to one founding document about pedagogy around teaching political discourse, and be on the same page. And I really do find I've learned so much from it. And it talks specifically about, there's 3 pillars, and one of them is discipline nonpartisanship. And it talks specifically about why that is so important for students, because school's biggest service that we provide to students is curiosity, engagement, and like willing to engage with others who may think differently from them. And public stance taking can really undermine a school's mission to create a space where that curiosity and inquiry really flourish. It can really chill question asking. It can stifle a question that's really designed for understanding. And it reminding us that most students don't actually know how they feel about politics yet and why, but many of them desperately want to. And that it is really truly our job to establish both norms of truth seeking as a school. Like, we're not in a cafe, we're not in a coffee shop, but as a school, like academically bring in sources, but also to make it our job, not just create the safe space where anyone can speak up and give their perspective, because that's absolutely important, but to intentionally bring into the curriculum those other perspectives. Relying on it to organically bubble up amongst our students in a conversation probably won't happen. Students sometimes don't know how they feel. They can be scared, and oddly enough, despite like a school even like Taft, which has students from 60 countries and 40 states, they can be fairly homogenous, being the fact that they're teenagers and they're all sitting in that room at that point in time. So it is up to us academically to bring those counter perspectives into the classroom to be dealt with under academic scrutiny. So that's like the whole like kind of summary of this idea of discipline nonpartisanship. But it's in that, I can put that resource in the chat, but it's been hugely helpful for those of us who are trying to decide, like, how are we navigating the election? How are we navigating how we feel about the election? How are we holding our own feelings when we feel really heavily? And how are we holding students' feelings?
So a couple of thoughts. One is that at the system level, so again, I mentioned that we're a fairly large independent school across 3 campuses, lower, middle, and upper. You know, I think it's really important to kind of channel the oxygen mask metaphor. You know, anytime we get on an airplane to travel, the flight attendants going through their pre-flight expectations always say that in the event of a loss of oxygen, a yellow mask will fall. And if you're traveling with young children or people in need of your care, what are you supposed to do? You actually take care of yourself first. So it's really important, I think, as a school leader from my perspective, to breathe oxygen into the adult people in our school so that we can actually model what we're asking students to do. So at BBNN, and I put this as an answer in the answer, we've developed a series of 7 guiding principles to inform how we want to engage throughout the election season. One of the principles that we have is that we teach about politics while refraining from being partisan. We focus on facts, policies, and the democratic process rather than endorsing specific candidates or parties. You know, we talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our schools, and I think that there's a kind of diversity that we have not done particularly well, which is ideological diversity. And so I think it's really important to name that and uplift that. And it's really, really hard right now. I want to be very clear, because in some cases, some of the rhetoric sort of violates some of our core values as an institution. And so towing that line is challenging. So that's sort of at the system level, is getting the adult people to be on the same page around a set of principles that inform how we are going to be, and also creating time and space for meaningful dialogue among the adults to process our emotional orientation towards what's happening in the world. And so at BBNM, we use a protocol called reflective structured dialogue that comes out of an organization called Essential Partners, which is an incredible not-for-profit that was formed in the late 80s in the Boston area to help. Actually, they sort of came into notoriety around helping people who were adamantly pro-life talk with people who are fervently pro-choice, actually in the aftermath of a couple of abortion-related violence at abortion clinics in the Boston area. I'll say in my work with students, and just bringing back to what I said earlier about Braver Angels, for the past 4 years, I've been teaching a senior elective called Beyond Our Echo Chambers. And I have partnered through Braver Angels with a colleague at a school in Lake Charles, Louisiana, deep in the bayou of southern Louisiana. As red as Cambridge, where I am, is blue. And over the course of 10 weeks, we have a virtual exchange, 90 minutes a week, where a dozen BBNN seniors are engaging in dialogue with a dozen kids from the Young Republican Club in Southwest Louisiana. We do not talk about controversial issues for the first 3 sessions. We talk about what your life is like. What kind of music do you listen to? What do you do on the weekends? What do you aspire to evolve into in your adult lives? Try to connect on a human level, which sets the foundation for talking about controversial issues. And ultimately, students each pick an issue that they want to delve deeply with a student from the other school. And the way that we construct that is to actually literally force them to make a Venn diagram of the issue and what in the center are they willing to agree on? And then on the other side, what do they agree to disagree on? So the task of asking them to really think about what are points of commonality really does humanize the other in a way that has been very, very powerful.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Jed. Does anyone else have any thoughts on, building that commonality or bringing differing viewpoints together? Yeah, Jocelyn.
So one of the things that we do is we have, a homegrown curriculum, which is our advisor curriculum here at Conard High School. And we do this across both high schools. But one of the things that we do as part of our curriculum is really set standards for the way that we communicate. So we set early respect agreements when we talk about things that we may not agree on, and really set kind of communication norms for how we communicate when we agree, when we disagree, and how do we ensure that we have facts. So we've done a lot of work with digital citizenship here at Conard and really been able to say, like, how do you get your information? How do you continue to evolve your information? And how do you search when you think something is wrong? How do you make sure that like your information you think is right is validated? So there's a lot of pieces to that, but we definitely want to always set the norms. And I love what Jed said with regards to, understanding people first. We do a lot of work in our community before we talk about any topic that's connected or controversial. We always talk about the human connection first and letting people get to know one another.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Alejandro.
Well, when I was teaching back in Colombia, I remember I just came out of college and I was very politicized. And at the beginning of my career, I used to be very biased towards a specific political framework. And this got me into a lot of trouble with parents, with students, with the school itself. It's because at the beginning, I didn't realize the power that we as teachers have in front of a classroom. I wasn't possibly being fully responsible of that because students are looking at us and they see us as role models. So I was possibly not using that power responsibly, but then I realized that we needed to approach these issues with a lot more care. Then I moved to Chile, and it's a very interesting context because Chile has still under living memory 17 years of dictatorship. Even though it ended in the early 90s, it is still part of the political discourse, and it is something that hurts. So how do you approach, for example, teaching the breakdown of democracy in 1973 is still an issue. And even though technically the curriculum prescribes to have a multi-perspective approach, in reality, the pain that the military government caused in the living memories of Chileans is still there. So we have had this conversation about being politically neutral with our colleagues, and it's very difficult because in the end, we all have our own personal preferences and biases. So what I try to do is aim for neutrality, aim for objectivity, aim for the truth of the matter, but also be very transparent about what your personal perspective is and what your personal biases are, so that students understand that you're also a human who has particular tendencies, and that they also admit you as, you're not supposed to be telling them the unbiased, objective, absolute truth. You're aiming for it, but in the end, you're also a person who has particular experiences, particular memories, and who has lived through the history of a country that still somehow has these living memories of what happened in the past, and that this informs your perspective. So being really honest about what your perspective is also gives the students like this sense of reality.
Alejandro, I think that's a great point about, at times helping your students understand the context of how you came to your ideas and how you built that, and modeling that for students about, how you came to those ideas. I used to, when I was teaching, I always remember I used to be, sometimes, students would ask me for my opinion on something, and I used to always, kind of almost add the caveat of, are you asking, like, you're truly asking for now, Mr. Johnson's opinion, not the teaching part, but just really what I think. And I always try to be very clear about that. I think we've touched a little bit on it. I think as we've talked about fact and pieces like that, but I think one of the things I'm very struck by right now, and I think a lot of people, we're living in a period of widespread misinformation, especially on social media platforms, which students, depending on the student, spend a lot of time on. So my question is, how are you equipping students to identify, evaluate, and respond to false or misleading information? Are there specific strategies you're using with students to help them be critical consumers of the online content and, be able to identify things that are, false? Yeah, Bree.
I've got one great little tool that I often use when I'm having students use like a current events research, or they're giving a presentation. Many of you probably may use it too, but I can send it. It's called the Ad Fontes Media Bias Chart. And it's fascinating because it gives like a formula, and it gives you a score, and it juxtaposes reliability and bias on like two different axes. And almost every media outlet in the world is in there. And I tell students all the time that with every single source that they use, like in their presentation or their paper, or they want to even bring into the classroom for discussion, they should run it through there first. Are they allowed to use sources that have bias? Absolutely, as long as they acknowledge the bias and they have a high reliability score. Are they allowed to use anything that has a low reliability score that spreads misinformation and is documented as such? Not in a classroom. Right. So like I make them go through that it's a really cool chart. You can plug in what you want. It shows you where it ends up on the chart, and it gives you a little score for both those things. And it helps us acknowledge bias. It helps us embrace those different biases, bring them into the classroom, but always reminding us that we are a school and it's evidence-based and it has to be truthful. And if it's not, then it doesn't belong. It doesn't belong here.
Yeah, Donna.
I use that source too. That source is awesome. Another source that I find very helpful, it's called the News Literacy Project, and I can put it on there as well. And they have curriculum that you can use to teach students to find how to identify sources. And I'll be honest, their curriculum's great, but I just run out of time. We're social studies teachers. We have to cram everything in. But you can sign up for something called the SIFT, which I'll also link in there, and they will send you a weekly PowerPoint. It's all done for you, and it will show you, it'll pull up misinformation that the students probably have seen on TikTok or whatever, and it'll ask the students to find, what's wrong with this, and they have to identify how the source is inaccurate. And I find that engages them because it gives them, they'll say, oh, I thought that was real. And you're just constantly pointing out, you have to check the source. You have to check the source. And then one other quick thing that I just wanted to mention is we talk a lot about the dangers of these sources and what happens. And I use all different kinds of politics. What is the danger in saying, a false story about immigrants? What's the danger in a party saying that the New Hampshire Libertarian Party just posted something about murdering Kamala Harris? So what is the danger in that? And then it's just very important that they know they shouldn't share their information. It's extremely dangerous, and we have to stop as a society.
Thank you, Donna and Bree. Yeah, Bobo.
Thank you, Bree and Donna. I thought I wrote all those resources down. That's really helpful. I want to just piggyback off of what you guys saying. I think it's really important that we understand that we're here to make our students become thinkers. And so something that I do with my kids, not just what they find on media, but just what they hear from their friends or in an everyday conversation with somebody or hear something off the street, is I make them challenge what they're doing and I make them challenge what we're teaching. And so, and the reason why I do that with my kids, a lot of times, for example, I asked them first day of school, I said, what makes a good student? And then they shared the different things. And I asked them, okay, who told you that? And then I asked if that's realistic, because what is very important is that we understand is that the more that we allow and teach our students how to become thinkers, it's going to become naturally for them when they hear false information to say, where did that come from and how and why do people think that way? Because a lot of times they're just going to what's popular and what everyone's doing, and they're not taking the time to think. So I think creating those spaces to stop and ask them, why are we doing this? Why are you learning this? Why is this important for us to learn, and have them think it out and give them that space? And yes, it can be time consuming, but it's important because it's going to create practice, which is going to teach them to do that in their everyday life. And so I think that, again, I think that's where it kind of boils down to is figuring out, not, and these are great tools and resources, but I think it comes down to just figuring out, like you said, the danger of a single story, the danger of false stories, and how does it impact people.
Awesome. Thank you, Bobo. Yeah, Alejandro?
Carl, regarding truth and fact, I think what most of us as history and social studies teachers do towards the development of historical thinking skills, namely document-based analysis, for instance, is something that really contributes to students being able to develop this sense, of critical thinking that allows them to tell fact from fiction or fact from deceit, right? So I think most of us all throughout the world as history teachers use primary sources and secondary sources and analyze them in depth in class from the perspective of, who wrote this, what could have been the purpose of the person who wrote or created this source. I think that this kind of training that we all do every day in our classroom is the training that students will be able later to transfer or apply to other media messages.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, Jocelyn.
I think one of the other pieces for us, we're working with such an international population and students who have newly arrived to the US and come directly into our school, is really being able to provide like context and connection for them to understand. One thing for me, I was born in Santiago, Chile. And, I came to the US during right before an election. I was very confused about the process. I was very confused about why people were openly speaking about the government in such a way that in the US they do in a very different way. And so I think providing the context and connection is very important because, one, not all students understand the process. Not all students understand the cultural aspects of what the US does with regards to politics is very different. And so I think being able to talk to students and connect from their home process to be able to almost help them transfer to understand and better understand the process here is huge.
No, that's excellent. Thank you for adding that perspective, Jocelyn, too. I think that's an incredible point about, students who may be, coming to the United States and not fully understanding the dynamics. And like you said, just the cultural perspectives of, how we engage around elections and communicate with each other, which might be very different. I think, we're getting close in time. And I think we've, I think this is an extension from what we were just talking about, but just quickly, do people have any further thoughts or ways that you've helped students? And I think Alejandro was hitting this with the historical context pieces, but I think one of the real challenges right now is helping students to grapple with the complexities of issues instead of just defaulting to it seems to be pretty widespread, which is good versus bad, or, right versus wrong. And helping students really seeing the complexity of things instead of just, demonizing one side and, believing that your side is right. So I'm just wondering if anyone else has any other thoughts about that, or activities they've done with students or resources they use with them, helping students really dive into the complexity of things. Yeah, Donna.
This is something that I focus on constantly in my class, and that issues and people are complicated. Nothing is black and white. So we do this all the time. And one example of a lesson that I've done, and you can use different topics, is we used, in looking at liberty versus order, which is how do we balance security of our country versus our freedoms. I might use gun controls, and we talk about how children, well, in 2021, the CDC and the American Center for Disease Control reported that firearms contributed to more deaths in children than any other type of illness. So we look at that statistic, the students all agree this is bad. They don't like that. So then the groups will get together and they'll brainstorm, well, why is this happening? Okay, we make a list. Then we brainstorm, well, what are some solutions? They do that in groups, we make the list. But then we start talking about what's wrong with those solutions. So I will start playing devil's advocate, and whatever position they'll take, I will take the opposite. And I'll say, well, if in America we have the Second Amendment, and they'll say, well, but we should take away guns. Well, I can't, so we'll just start debating that. And when they agree with me, I'll say, well, I thought you wanted to stop childhood deaths. So they start to realize that they do want to stop this, but it's really hard. And then they look at, we never did the Venn diagram. I love that idea, Jed. But just looking at how can these two groups come together and come up with some common sense solutions that might work. So the idea is that you take half of a period to look at a complicated thing, break it down, and then pull it apart again. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Don, I think that's awesome. And I think really, a great strategy for helping students really think about just the complexity of things. Yeah, Jed.
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned earlier that obviously situation and circumstances are heightened in a presidential election year. But if you look at the scatter graph of how members of Congress have voted over the last 70 years, you can see an increasing polarization in terms of folks who are Democrat versus folks who are Republican, in terms of the frequency of how often they vote across the aisle, so to speak. So this is a pervasive and ubiquitous challenge. I might sound, overly idealistic, but I really do think that human connection is the most important thing, and this is about skill building, particularly around perspective taking. So one of the tools that we use a lot is helping students to understand the difference between a question of persuasion versus a question of understanding. And it doesn't have to be around policy issues. It can be around anything. There's the classic one of, is a hot dog a sandwich, right? Like you could take something as inane as that and ask students to have a conversation and do it both from a perspective of persuasion, where you're really trying to win. To your point earlier, Carl, we're in an era where we think in binaries. It's yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong, win, lose. And so questions of persuasion sort of come from that tradition versus questions of understanding, which is really trying to understand the why. I put a resource in the chat, the why someone thinks the way that they do, not to try to prove that you're right and they're wrong, but to really try to understand the kind of origin story of their belief system, and then to try to find some way of not necessarily agreeing, but understanding that multiple perspectives can be true at the same time. And that's why the whole conversation previously about truth in the media is so complicated right now, because, and one of the strategies we use with our older students is to have students actually watch the spin after a debate on different media outlets, because if you only listen to one news perspective, then you're going to think that that's true. And if you listen to the other one, you're going to think that that's true. So really critically examining the multiple perspectives.
Yeah, thank you, Jed. I think that's a great point too about removing sometimes maybe the political nature and talking about something, like you said, inane, but getting them to do that thought process. I'm going to go to Bobo for the final word on this, and I'm going to ask the final question just because we are going to be short on time. Bobo?
So just piggybacking off of what Jed just said. So an activity that I did that kind of exercised what you were explaining was we did a critical forum of how to have healthy conversations with a student I did with a group of students last year. And so what we did is we did it on a topic on immigration, and we assigned the students the conversation or stance that they were going to take. So the first stance was, that immigration was bad. The second stance was that immigration was good. And then the third one was kind of in the middle. And so we had students, again, they didn't pick it. It kind of forced them to kind of walk through the process, look at the information, and figure out, why do people take this stand or defend this stand? And how can I learn from that? And so from there, we had like an ongoing debate, but you had a debate from the source or the position that you were assigned. And so what we found from that exercise, that it helps students, one, to see something from a different perspective, to kind of gain more of an understanding, because I agree with Jed. At the end of the day, it's all about how can we have empathy towards one another and understand one another. And once I can see you as another human being and understand where you're coming from, then we can find common ground. And so we found that it helps students more better when they're forced to pick a different side, and make them kind of understand why people see things the way they did, and why people argue certain things. And it kind of put them in a position to learn from them.
No, thank you. And I couldn't agree more, getting back to, who people are in their context. And, I think it's come up multiple times today, just the relationships between people and building those relationships to see other sides. I just, I want to give the panelists one final chance. If there's any piece of advice or a resource or, a quick tip you want to leave people with as we end today, we'll go around, and anyone who wants to share, just please, take that opportunity. So I think Jocelyn, you had your hand.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest pieces that we do as adults is we validate how students feel in terms of the democratic process and feeling like their choice and voice matters. So, as a principal, one of the things that I do is like things that are even small, like the choice of milk in the cafeteria or the choice of something in the cafeteria. When kids come to me and say, hey, can we add this, or can we consider it? And I don't make all of the changes that are suggested by students, because we can't have a pool here on the second floor in our classrooms. But we certainly want to make sure that adults are validating the democratic pieces that they do, like their choice, the advocacy. I think as adults, we model that, and we model how we receive feedback about things that students feel passionate about. So that's really the piece that many of our kids look to us to see how we react and how we support. And then how do we encourage the students to use their sphere of influence to make and create change, whether it's local or national.
Excellent. Any other final piece of advice or resources? Yeah, Bree.
I just always try to remind myself when I'm coming up with a lesson or preparing for one of these conversations that my main job as these kiddos' teacher is not to teach them what to think, but to teach them how to think.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, Donna.
I just want to say to stay passionate and just teach them that people and issues are very complicated and need to be examined and understood, not demonized. That's it.
So thank you, Donna. I think Alejandro, and then we'll go to Bobo.
Yeah, I've got a great resource I want to share. It's called the Digital Inquiry Group. They have a series of document-based activities, so that every now and then we don't teach just through the textbook, but through primary documents that have different perspectives on the historical topics that we share. That's one strategy. And the second one that I really like to use, particularly with my Model United Nations Club, it's teaching them about logical fallacies. once they know about logical fallacies, they have like a very, very different view when it comes to analyzing debates and persuasive discourse. So I just shared those two with the chat.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I used to teach sociology, and that was one of my favorite things to talk to students about. I believe Bobo and then Jed.
So I just want to end on this note. A Chinese proverb says, "Give a man a fish, and you will feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish, and you will feed him for a lifetime." And so the reason why I like to live like this is that, again, we're making our students become thinkers. And so sometimes we can get caught up in the chaos of the everyday issues and things. But one thing that's not going to change is how we solve these problems. So we continue to just teach our students, teach them how to become thinkers, and teach them how to address challenges. Does not matter the topic, they're going to be able to conquer it.
Awesome. And Jed?
Yeah, I just want to underscore what I said earlier, which is that this is sort of about the current election, but it's really about the preservation of our democracy. And what do we as educators get trained in EpiPens and for CPR and first aid because we want to prepare for the critical moments, but we do that when it's not a critical moment. And so my charge to myself is to the earlier point, like, what am I doing in the off presidential election seasons to make sure that I am learning, growing, challenging myself to be the best person that I can be, the best educator that I can be in the spaces when it's most critical.
That's a great point. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, but I sincerely want to thank our panelists. One of the things I always tell people is when I get a chance to talk to students, it makes me incredibly hopeful for the future. And I'll echo that sentiment of listening to all of you today and the work you're doing with our students and, setting up the future. It makes me incredibly hopeful for what we're going to see. So sincerely, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all the resources you shared, all the information you shared with our viewers.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carl. And thank you to all of our panelists. I couldn't agree more with Carl's remarks. I feel much more hopeful about our future. I think the resources provided were very practical. And as Jed cracked it, Teaching the Election was the title to get everyone here, but it is about teaching civics, active participation, our values every day, 24/7, every year. Thank you again to our panelists. I wish we could spend a few more hours together because I think you would have plenty more wisdom to share with our audience, but we'll have to leave it here for now. And we look forward to seeing everybody next month at the next forum and at the Leadership Conference in November. So thank you again and have a great day.